Some of my favorite stories are the ones that ask hard questions. How could someone defeat a giant when they've only ever caught a butterfly? Kimo Fujin is a manga that began in October of 2021, created by Twitter user @CanonPick, but more colloquially known as Fujiso. The story follows the titular Kimo Fujin after she's given an axe and told to defeat giants. What unfolds is a bizarre story in an even more bizarre world, full of monsters and supernatural beings, all of which is experienced from the perspective of the cute and kind Kimo Fujin. On her journey, Kimo Fujin encounters enemies as well as allies like the eccentric Dr. Foxtail and the English-speaking assassin Timber Collectwood, and learns that maybe defeating the giants is the last of her worries, as Lovecraftian creatures lurk around every corner. Inspired by works like Bokurano, Madoka Magica, and the game Yume Nikki, Kimo Fujin gained traction in Japan rather quickly thanks to the popularity of its cute characters. However, the series has been massively underrepresented in English, mostly due to the language barrier and scarcity of fan translations. So consider this an English-speaking spotlight on both the manga Kimo Fujin as well as its creator Fujiso, who was also nice enough to take some time out of his day and answer some questions I had both about the series and his own personal inspirations. The manga begins by immediately introducing our main character Kimo Fujin, which can also be translated as Mrs. Furry. In the first panel, a strange man appears out of nowhere, gives her an axe, and tells her she must defeat giants. We're not told what exactly giants are, or who this man is, where he came from, or why Kimo Fujin feels so obligated to follow these orders. And that's something you need to be aware of going into Kimo Fujin. One of the greatest barriers of entry for the series, language aside, is the internal logic. One of the first questions I asked Fujiso was if he plans his stories out ahead of time, or if he writes making it up as he goes. According to Fujiso, he does have a general plan where the story's going as he writes, only making changes where he sees fit or when he comes up with new ideas. That was a bit surprising to me because the manga as a whole has a distinct stream of conscious feel to it, almost like you're watching someone's dream. Supernatural things will just happen and characters will simply accept that that's the case. Rarely is time taken to explain or extrapolate on things. After this mysterious man bestows an axe upon Kimo Fujin, she goes out for tea and laments that she can't defeat a giant when she's only ever caught a butterfly. She then receives a call from her husband, who explains how important it is to kill giants. But Kimo Fujin suggests that instead of killing the giants, maybe she could make them her friend. Her husband tells her, "You are being delusional. This is not a pretty world. The time of butterflies is over." He also points out that the lake she can see from the cafe is actually the footprint of a giant. As Kimo Fujin struggles to fathom such immense responsibility, there's a gunshot. As the gunman approaches, he says in English, "I killed giant." Kimo Fujin runs from the cafe, and it's here that she encounters the first monster of the series. This creature is called an Irregular, and it's a cosmic horror beyond our comprehension. This is what I mean when I say Kimo Fujin is like watching a dream. Immediately after having a man give her an axe and tell her to kill giants, which she accepts that she just has to do, she comes face to face with a bizarre Lovecraftian monster that isn't a giant. The way she talks to her husband insists that she's never seen a giant before. But later on, we see a battlefield littered with remains from battles against the giants. It could be the result of reading a machine-translated version of the comic, or that the English translation just isn't as far as the Japanese, obviously. But this is something that doesn't seem to have been explained. Timber Collectwood kills the Irregular and then turns his gun to Kimo Fujin's husband. Her husband then regenerates and morphs the body of the smartphone into guns. Before the fight can start, Kimo Fujin's stomach growls, so her husband stops to materialize a baked potato. Kimo Fujin's husband seems to be familiar with this man, being the one to reveal his name and his power being that he can trace a person's location by calling their phone number. He was looking for the phone number of a giant, but once he realizes Kimo Fujin doesn't have what he's looking for, he leaves. Kimo Fujin's husband then leads her to a place known as the Titan Institute, a place where warriors who hunt giants gather. Here, they meet Dr. Foxtail.
99,998 giants! 99,999 giants! 100,000 giants! I'm a genius!
Dr. Foxtail brings Kimo Fujin into a chamber holding a giant chunk of flesh, and explains that the chunk of flesh was actually ripped from the shoulder of a giant. She wants to see how much damage Kimo Fujin can do to a giant's skin, when suddenly, the man who gave Kimo Fujin the axe appears. This time, he appears before Dr. Foxtail, who refers to him as the client. Here we learn that when the client appears before someone, only they can see him. The client will then bestow upon them a weapon and orders them to kill giants. Dr. Foxtail receives a knife, but is distraught because she was hoping that she'd have more time to research the giants before she'd be forced to fight them. This interaction is probably the most world building we get in the early stages of the story. Dr. Foxtail does briefly explain afterwards that disobeying the client will result in your death, and because of this, her and Kimo Fujin are forced to abandon the research lab and begin their own journey to defeat the giants. Once Dr. Foxtail and Kimo Fujin set out on their journey, the story really picks up, and it's mostly due to these characters having great chemistry with each other. Dr. Foxtail reveals her greatest giant-killing invention to Kimo Fujin, the God-Killer Black Veronica. Dr. Foxtail gets up, leaving Black Veronica on the table, and Kimo Fujin immediately begins playing with it. Then,
It broke?
this video is sponsored by Sakuraco and Tokyo Treat, who were nice enough to send us 2 of their boxes. Sakuraco is focused on traditional Japanese snacks, and Tokyo Treat focuses more on contemporary Japanese snacks. If you don't recognize any of the snacks in either box, don't worry, because each box has a booklet that will teach you about each snack inside, as well as teach you about the culture of Japan. The theme for the Sakuraco box is Tea Time in Yokohama, and it's packed with a lot of bread, cracker, and rice-related goodies. Ichigo Inc. teamed up with the Kanagawa government and local snack makers to introduce Yokohama's delights in this special Yokohama-themed box. It also comes with 2 bags of their Hoji Cha tea. They also provided this beautiful side plate to drink it from, which we completely ignored in favor of our own high-end china. As someone who normally doesn't like tea, I actually really enjoyed this, and it was then explained to me that Asian teas are usually tastier than what's served in the West. My favorite treat from the Sakuraco box, though, was the Bikuri Dorayaki, which is basically a pancake sandwich with filling inside. Now, I didn't check the booklet until after I had eaten it, but I found out that the filling was actually made of red bean paste, which is much more appetizing than the English language makes it sound. I was also a big fan of the chocolate bread, which is basically a sugary hamburger bun with chocolate in it. The other box they sent is Tokyo Treat, where the theme is Summer Matsuri, which comes piled high with the most exclusive, flavorful snacks Japan's summer festivals have to offer. I found that the snacks in this box were much more familiar, like the cookies and cream Kit Kats, the salty vanilla Pocky, and of course the Nissin UFO Dashi Yakisoba. Now, if we had read the manual Tokyo Treats had provided, we would know that you're actually supposed to drain the water after you make the yakisoba. But I think they need to realize that here in the United States, we play by a different set of rules.
Mamoru oishii desu.
I also really enjoyed the yakisoba, and over the 2 hours it took to film the live action segments of this video, I had eaten half the cookies and cream Kit Kats, while Chad had eaten most of the Pocky and blamed it on Ben. These boxes are great if you're into trying new foods, Japanese culture, or just need something fun to do with your friends, so click the link in the description to support the channel and pick up your box today. The relationship between Dr. Foxtail and Kimo Fujin is interesting because Dr. Foxtail is always belittling Kimo Fujin, and yet it doesn't seem to bother her. When her husband criticizes her, it clearly had an effect on her, but when Dr. Foxtail calls her a super idiot and wrings out her snoot, she just agrees and tries to affirm her. And as the series goes on, we see Dr. Foxtail bond with Kimo Fujin, like in this scene after they've defeated a monster at the end of the second arc. I think this comes from the fact that Dr. Foxtail is a child, and so even when she says mean things to Kimo Fujin's motherly qualities kick in. Kimo Fujin never snaps or gets sad when Dr. Foxtail yells at her, and Kimo Fujin even makes Dr. Foxtail do the Japanese make my kid apologize bow. It only takes a few pages for you to reach the point where Kimo Fujin and Dr. Foxtail team up, but I think because of the release format, some people only check out the first few pages, get confused, and then click away. I say this because Kimo Fujin didn't start in a publication, but rather was published on Twitter in a giant Twitter thread, which is still how new chapters are produced today. While talking to Fujiso, I found out that this has actually become fairly common on Japanese Twitter over the past few years. The trend started after the success of Yu Kikuchi's Crocodile Who Will Die in 100 Days. In December of 2019, Kikuchi started a manga that follows a crocodile who will die in 100 days. But he decides to spend each day promoting a positive attitude and having mundane adventures. Some of these hit really hard, like in the New Year's comic when he pulls a fortune saying that he'll have good luck this year, while his friend pulls one saying he'll have bad luck this year. Kikuchi posted a new comic on social media every day for 100 days, leading to the finale of the comic. And the popularity of the comic led to a boom in independent social media published comics, with many of them later getting picked up for physical publications, including Kimo Fujin, which currently at the time of making this video has 2 volumes out. I asked Fujiso if he thought there were any negatives to this release format, and he said not really. It can be difficult to read a long Twitter thread, but the small inconvenience is worth it since it sells books. I personally picked up the first volume of Kimo Fujin to support Fujiso, and along with a bonus chapter, you also get uncensored art. You see, there's a fight against a monster who can generate hamsters, and there's a scene where a man's face bulges with a bunch of hamsters that was censored on the Twitter release. I thought this was a joke at the idea of a man's face exploding with hamsters being too graphic, but the physical version is actually uncensored. When you see Kimo Fujin, the first thing that grabs you is the art. I told Fujiso that when I discovered it, his art style reminded me a lot of the works of AC Boo. AC Boo is a company known for producing commercials and music videos with a unique art style, with many of their works becoming popular memes on the internet. Most Westerners probably know them for creating the Gallo Sengen music video in 2011, or for their work on the Pop Team Epic anime. When I brought this up to Fujiso, he said he'd never actually had his art compared to AC Boo before, and though he is a fan of their work, Fujiso says his surreal style was influenced by manga authors like the Nishioka siblings, Mohiro Kito, best known for Bokurano, as well as Parasite, Madoka Magica, and the game Yume Nikki. In 2022, a series of Kimo Fujin ASMR readings were put together with voice actress Yuko Minaguchi in the role of Kimo Fujin. I asked Fujiso why he chose Minaguchi, and he said, "I've always listened to and enjoyed Yuko Minaguchi's voice. When choosing a voice actress for Kimo Fujin, there is no other voice I feel so comfortable listening to. Very girlish and cute. Mature and a sexy voice actress. Yuko Minaguchi-sama was perfect." Fujiso said he grew up with a lot of 90s anime, and since he's actually the same age as me, I asked if Minaguchi's role as Hotaru, aka Sailor Saturn, was his first experience hearing her voice, since it was most likely mine. He said it was actually her performance as Nora Miyako in the Doraemon short film that introduced him to her voice, and he's loved it ever since. When I asked if there were any plans to send Kimo Fujin overseas, he said that there were none at the time, but also never expected any foreigners to follow Kimo Fujin. He explained that language barrier aside, the series is very Japanese in its world building and sensibilities, and he assumed this would make character interactions come off as confusing or weird. And for sure they do, but that's kind of what I like about it. It really does feel like over the last few decades, and in the last few years especially, anime is being produced with a greater awareness of the international market. Anime going mainstream benefits a lot of people, and a lot of artists who make great shit. But I'm also happy to see Japanese media that doesn't concern itself with reaching a wide demographic. The foreign DNA that Fujiso said would make it harder for Western fans to enjoy it is actually what I find most appealing about his comic, and I think people who like 80s OVAs and old school anime will feel the same way I do.